to Church and State with Chris Ferrara and Brian McCall. I apologize, we missed our show 2 weeks ago. As you may have seen from the announcement that the Fatima Center put up, my father passed away, and I was occupied, obviously, with events for that. And I just, before we start, want to thank all the people who have sent in wishes and mass intentions. It's really been overwhelming because they put up that announcement, that the number of people that I honestly I've never met before who watched the show and contacted me, said they were having masses said for my father. So I want to thank all of you who did that, and even those maybe didn't even let me know who said prayers. I really appreciate it.
We'll be mentioning
but we're back here documenting the decomposition of church and state in the modern world, and we start over in Rome, and we've had some real interesting controversy. The church in America, that bastion of traditional orthodoxy, Cardinal Blaise Cupich, who's never met a traditional mass he didn't want to suppress, decided he had to do something new. He had to give out a Lifetime Achievement Award. And who does he pick? The politician, Democrat Dick Durbin. Radical, pro-abortion politician, got high marks from Planned Parenthood, but he's a good guy, and we should honor his whole life. This created an outcry among a lot of U.S. bishops, including the bishop in whose diocese Durbin actually lives, who won't give him communion. And there was Durbin. I have to give the guy credit. I don't really like him very much, but he actually said, you know what, no thanks for the award in light of all this. But then Pope Leo decided, in a very Pope Francis-esque fashion, to wade into the controversy and first admit, I know nothing about the case. I don't know the facts of the case, but we have to look at the guy's whole life after all. And just, if he's for abortion, but he's against the inhumane treatment of immigrants, I mean, that's important. So what was your reaction to this, Chris?
As part of the post-conciliar trend, it's an additional tendency that we see, not only the liberalization of the Pope, so that the Pope becomes essentially a political figure that is wedded to the zeitgeist, but also the tendency to weigh in on matters in which the Pope has absolutely no confidence or even knowledge of the basic facts, as with the case concerning climate change and immigration policy. I hope we get to the immigration stance of Pope Leo. I want to be optimistic, but in view of what he said about immigration, I think something along the lines of legitimate criticism is called for here. So we're talking
about that. I mean, he basically equating not letting illegal people in your country to killing the unborn. I mean, he's basically saying that we got to consider them all.
Well, the problem with that is the typical, I hate to say it, hypocrisy of those who advocate open borders for thee, but not for me, because the Vatican City State has the most restrictive immigration policy in all of Europe. If you set foot in the Vatican City State without authorization and you're apprehended, that's a potential 5-year prison term. Not a single person can reside there without the explicit permission of the Holy See. And yet there are plenty of places in the Vatican enclave for refugees. They get given cots in the hallways of the vast palazzos, many of which have empty rooms. They could be housed anywhere. You could even build special temporary housing for them if you're so concerned about the fate of so-called refugees. And these people are really just basically military age economic migrants who march into the United States waving their national flags, and then they get here and send remittances back home. That's why they're here. They're not true refugees from anything. But again, this is a Pope weighing in on a subject about which he knows nothing, particularly in the American context.
No, it's true. Actually, one of the things I tell my students, never start off, I know nothing about this, but let me give him my opinion. It's not a good way to start off. But I mean, he seems to be following through in the same policy of Pope Francis, that the only border that you need to be worried about that cannot be breached is the Ukraine-Russia border. Every other border, is fine. And is that really the Catholic teaching, is that there's some inalienable natural right to migrate wherever you want?
No, there's no such right. And someone should put to him the question as follows: do you admit that there are reasonable limits on immigration and that a nation has the right to impose legal requirements, as does the Vatican, for residency within its borders? You're not advocating, are you, Holy Father, an open borders policy for the United States when the Vatican has no such policy? Are you? I'd like to see the answer to that question. The problem with these liberal popes, though, is that they never get challenged by probing questions from the Catholic press, and certainly not from the media, because the media is eating this stuff up, because it's right in line with what Francis talked about. And I guess we'll get to the blessing of the chunk of ice at some point in our little conversation.
I think it's in the Roman ritual somewhere, the blessing of the chunk of ice. Although, actually, one of the worst defenses of that I heard was actually Michael Knowles. He said, well, we bless water, bless holy water. So this is just like blessing holy water.
Well, I mean, I guess in a sense, it's correct, because as we saw during the event, the cameraman focused in on one corner of the block of ice, and there was actually water dripping off the back of it. So, did you like the part where they were waving the blue sheet in the audience to symbolize the waves of Earth waters? Cardinals were participating in this, making absolute fools of themselves. But that's par for the course.
We did laugh about how silly this is, but at a root core, there is, again, it's not as blatant maybe as Francis, but this whole climate agenda movement, at the root of it is a neo-paganism. It's a sort of deification of the earth and treating the earth like some pagan god.
Well, Michael Crichton wrote a really prophetic essay, and this is a scientist / science fiction writer, or a physician / science fiction writer, and he predicted that the climate change phenomenon would devolve into a religion. There would be the original sin of offense against the climate, and then redemption. Man will redeem himself by offering up himself as a sacrifice to the planet. It's all in his essay, and this is what we see. It's an actual religious movement, and we're told in papal documents, no less, that there is now a need for, wait for it, ecological conversion. A literal quasi-religious conversion is now required of us. What does ecological conversion mean? Well, no one knows, because this is one of the many empty neologisms and catchphrases and buzzwords that have proliferated in the language of the church since the great confusion of the Second Vatican Council. No one knows what ecological conversion means. I guess it means whatever liberal democratic governments impose on the average man while the elites jet all over the globe in their private jets, spewing more carbon in 2 hours than the average poor citizen will do in a year.
Wow. Well, everyone's got to do their part.
Yeah, right. And they never tell us, by the way, what exactly we would do that would, in some definable quantity, reduce the so-called threat of the undefined to begin with, climate change. We don't know what climate change really means. We don't know what any of these measures would do to affect climate change. First of all, not knowing what it is, and secondly, not knowing scientifically how anything we do would affect it. There's nothing but computer simulations no better than the presumptions that go into the programming. So it is, as Trump says, a green scam. That's all it is, a complete scam.
It is, and it has an underlying political agenda, though, to control, to use it as a pretext for putting through other policies. And it's really a shame to see, the See of Peter, the Supreme Pontiff, sort of just putting himself at the service of these sort of political hacks.
It's not the function of the church. Even if there were a legitimate political issue here, and you could take a position on it based on actual science, that wouldn't be for the Pope to do anyway. The Pope wouldn't be putting out bulletins on climate change. And yet that's what we're seeing with this Vatican embrace of not only climate change, but a whole agenda of items that's indistinguishable from that of the European Union. Open borders, climate change, opposition to so-called nationalism, which is nothing more than people defending their own borders against invasion. And again, none of this is a problem for the Vatican, because he sits behind 40-foot high walls surrounded by an armed security guard force.
So, stepping back from all this, we're over 4 months into this papacy. What are your thoughts now? Is this more or less Francis 2.0, or what?
I think it's less. I think it'll be less. We've been critical during the first part of this segment, but I don't think that we're dealing with someone who is vindictive, vicious, demagogic, who hates observant Catholics, who will spend his entire pontificate hurling insults at people who actually practice the faith and believe in obeying the sixth commandment and all the other commandments. No, I don't think we'll see that. And I think there are good signs that he's not going to be hostile to people, especially young people, who are attracted to the traditional Latin Mass. I think he himself has celebrated it, may even be celebrating it now. So we're not here tonight to condemn the Pope. We're just lamenting this continuation of a trend where the Pope just swims along with the zeitgeist. He has to stand up. Some Pope, at some point, if the church is going to be renewed, has to stand against the spirit of the age. Every Pope did it before 1962. Even to some extent did John the 23rd, because just before the council, he insisted that the Latin liturgical tradition, in fact, the use of Latin in every department of the church, must be preserved and restored where it had fallen into disuse. He insisted upon it in Veterum Sapientia. So even he was trying to, in some way, stand against the spirit of the age, even though he had this idea of an opening to the world that would somehow make the world more receptive to the church. And what happened was the church became totally receptive to the world.
Right. Yeah, which is essentially the story of the last 6 decades, is just an opening of the church, just letting down of the guard and letting the state infiltrate the church, letting the secular world infiltrate the church. So with that, though, let's cross over to the state, talk about some things in political life. And there's a topic that is sort of always around the news, but is getting more attention now because of the sort of outbreak of political and really just sick violence. And we had the murder of Charlie Kirk. We had the Catholic Church attacks when there's little children, in church praying. Then, these are just the most recent. Mormon church being attacked. Now, again, instead of looking for the real causes of what's driving these poor people to, act in such violent ways to become killers, the liberal media says, well, the whole problem is guns. And see, this is the fruit of not having gun control. And the real problem is we just take everyone's guns away. So, putting aside that fact that they don't want to actually see the causes of things, what is the Catholic position on this? Is like the 11th commandment, thou shalt not take away guns? Or is there some absolute right to own as many guns as you want?
Well, I wouldn't say there's an absolute right to compile an arsenal of deadly weapons, but there's certainly a right for purposes of self-defense and simple recreation, hunting, for example, with a firearm. And the Constitution does recognize that. I'm not sure it rises to the level of a natural right, but it's certainly a right that should be accorded to someone in civil society. Self-defense is a natural right, and owning a gun is a means of self-defense. If you take away all the guns, though, what will happen? Well, you'll have knife attacks, and you'll have attacks by drivers who drive into crowds. There was a bunch of incidents over in Europe of people driving into crowds with vans and mowing down 15, 20 people, killing 10, 15 people at once. So do we need van control? What about knife attacks? Do we need knife control? No, what we need is lunatic control. Yeah. Why do we have lunatics? We have lunatics for the same reason, and it's thematic to all of our episodes, that we have a civilization that is falling apart at the seams. People have turned their backs on God. They've lost sight of their eternal destiny. They've become nihilists. They live for this world only. And if this is all there is in your mind, why shouldn't you kill somebody who annoys you? And why shouldn't you take a gun and mow down a bunch of people? Because, well, you saw it in the video game. You thought it might be fun to try it. And you're a psychopath because you've been raised in an environment where there is no God, there is no morality. And maybe you're on these drugs, these mind-altering drugs for depression with black box warnings that say they promote suicidal and homicidal ideation. I bet all of these killers are on one or more of these drugs.
Well, it's multiple levels. We stop on that point. I mean, it's these. I mean, the amount of mind-altering drugs being prescribed is at records never seen before in this country. But then on top of that, we have all of these people, and many of them turn out to be some of these killers who are taking these hormone therapies to trick their body or try to turn their body into a different gender. On top of the fact you have this creeping that is now really taken over legalization of marijuana, again, another drug that, has effects on the mind, we know, and has, been linked from, several scientific studies to, in some people triggering psychotic events. And kind of, is any one of these responsible? No. But if you have a society that essentially, is a giant drug dealer culture, is it a surprise that there's more violence?
Well, in the common experience of mankind, marijuana, for instance, is basically destructive of cognition. That's why they call it dope.
Right.
Because it makes you dopey. I knew somebody in law school who basically smoked himself right out of law school and ruined his mind. And of course, there are many studies that with young people, it can trigger schizophrenia and other mental disorders. But what they want, what the elites want, is a population basically subdued by games and other amusements and marijuana, dope. And then if they become depressed, give them an SSRI, a black box warning that they may commit suicide or commit homicide when taking these drugs. We have what Philip Reef called the therapeutic age. Everybody's on therapy of some kind, drug therapy, psychiatric therapy, traced all the way back to the root cause. Again, we return to the problem of civilizational apostasy. I mean, John Paul II spent this entire pontificate talking about the coming millennium. It would be a great new renewal of the church, a new advent. But by 2003, he was talking about the demise of Christianity and silent apostasy. He ended up returning to the same line of pessimism about the modern world as every pope before 1962. And so did Cardinal Ratzinger. I've compiled a whole list of apocalyptic pronouncements by Pope Benedict as his pontificate drew to an end. In one of them, he said the very future of the world is at stake. And of course, he made the obligatory pilgrimage to Fatima, where on the way he revealed that the third secret talks about basically an apocalyptic crisis in the church like we've never seen before.
Even though what he revealed, claiming to be the third secret, doesn't say that. He admitted that he hadn't revealed it. Basically,
he revealed a part of it that we haven't seen, because there's nothing in what has been revealed that talks about sin within the church being the greatest threat to the church. But that's what he talked about at Fatima. And now we see that sin against the church has, as he said, manifested itself today in a really terrifying way, worse than ever before.
Yes. Well, turning back to the topic of gun ownership, and again, I think you're right. I mean, I think under the natural law, there is a natural right to use proportionate means to protect yourself, to preserve your and others' human life. I mean, that's life ought to be preserved is the first principle of the general principles of the natural law. But, some Republican and other politicians seem to take this to mean that there's no reasonable regulation, constraint that can be put on that. I mean, so for example, would a Catholic have to be opposed to any type of licensing or restrictions on certain people under certain circumstances being limited in that ability?
No, not at all. If someone has a history of mental illness, there should be a background check. Someone with a criminal conviction, a felony, should not be permitted to own a gun. There are all kinds of reasonable restrictions. The problem arises when you attempt an outright ban on a certain category of weapon, which is almost impossible to define. There was a judge out in the Ninth Circuit who was talking about this Ninth Circuit decision upholding a California law based upon the size of magazines of guns. And he was showing the typical hunting rifle, I think it's an AR-15, violates this law. And it's very easy to take the magazine out and replace it with a larger magazine. Well, if you have the AR-15 and it's permitted, and you pop the magazine out that comes with it and place it in a larger magazine, suddenly you're a felon, just because you changed the magazines. So you get into real problems trying to ban types of weapons, because it's very difficult to define a weapon type. But there are certain limits, obviously, like a machine gun has always been prohibited. A legitimate machine gun, not an AR-15 or a semi-automatic weapon, or a bazooka. You're not allowed to own a bazooka. So there are reasonable limitations. But it's difficult to draw lines, but those are pretty clearly things that you could prohibit. But the gun mania, I don't subscribe to it. I've never owned a firearm. I know people who do, and they have reason to own firearms. In fact, they have good reason to carry firearms with them, given the climate we have today. When you go to mass, you have a possibility of being mowed down by a crazy gunman.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, I think, a lot of it is just a simple distraction from, like I said, the real causes. That you have a sick society is really what we're saying. And a sick society is going to produce sick people who do very sad, sad things. And it's really what the popes have said all along. The only way out of this, as Pope Pius XI said in Ubi Arcano, is the peace of Christ is only possible in the kingdom of Christ. That there's only so far you can go in fixing these problems without coming to these first principles and to recognize the rights of Christ in his church.
Of course, but even in secular terms, in looking at secular society 60, 70, 80 years ago, there were plenty of guns. Guns were everywhere. Everybody had guns. Little kids were taught how to use guns. And there were no school shootings. There were no mass shootings in public places. The problem is not the guns, but the degeneration of the moral fiber of millions upon millions of people, which breeds these crazy homicidal maniacs who, as I said, are basically nihilists. They don't believe in anything. They believe in extinction. That's their ultimate end. They're going to become extinct. And on the way out, they're going to make a name for themselves. So a lot of these people commit these crimes so that people remember their names.
Yes, I mean, it seems to be the case. And certainly then, social media feeds into that. I mean, it creates an entire culture of where you do things to have your name preserved, on some social media platform.
And then we have the left, the politicians of the left, creating what even this recent study from Rutgers University is an institute sponsored by Rutgers, a study about the emergence of an assassination culture, which the Rutgers study, and Rutgers is no friend of Donald Trump, attributes to the left wing, to the rhetoric of the left wing, to the mentality of the left wing. The idea that because they lost an election and they've lost their grip on power, the only solution to that is violence and the encouragement of violence and assassination, outright assassination. Assassinate the president, assassinate Charlie Kirk, assassinate anybody whose common sense resonates with people, because at bottom, this is all about the devil at work, the war on common sense, which we see in modern philosophy and modern thinking generally. Again, the one-eyed man in the land of the blind is considered an enemy by the blind people. Right. He has to be dispensed with. That's how bad the situation is. But, of course, we'll conclude on the usual positive note, won't we?
Of course, because we know the end of this story. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. Russia will be consecrated to me, and a period piece will be given to the world. And, I know as Father Gruner always thought, that, it's going to have to get really bad, right? For people to recognize the miracle of the conversion of Russia, the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, there can't be a situation where there's some geopolitical natural explanation for things turning around. It has to be, the point where, Our Lady is our only hope. And clearly she is the only one through her son that could have done this.
Yeah, and the church as the channel of grace through the sacraments will bring that about. Christopher Dawson said it best in his book on Christianity in Europe, where he said, the current of renewal is always running beneath the desert sands of our civilization. The grace of God is there, and it will come to the surface again and bring new life. And Romano Amerio in Iota Unum put it this way. He said, our civilization is capable of a metanoia, mass conversion, if only the church will propose it. Right now, there's no offer from the church, because the philosophy of the post-conciliar epoch is we're okay and you're okay. All religions are more or less good and trustworthy or praiseworthy. The very error condemned by Pius XI. That will change when we get a pope who just doesn't give himself the name of a preconciliar pope, like the current pope, but who actually acts like they did and stands up against the spirit of the age. It may even be this pope before his pontificate is over, because let's not forget, Pius IX started out as a liberal. He wanted to give amnesty. All the liberals and the Masons in their reading rooms and secret meetings. And then he was almost assassinated by Masonic forces. And overnight he realized what had happened, and he became an implacable foe of the forces of political modernity, or what the moderns call liberty. So there could be a conversion against the spirit of the age by this Pope in during this pontificate. You have to pray for him, and certainly it's an improvement over what we had before.
Certainly. Well, there you have our assessment of recent events in church and state. Thank you for your support. Don't forget, pray your rosary every day, sacrifice for poor sinners. Our Lady told us so many people our souls are falling into hell because there's no one to pray for them. So pray, remember the 5 first Saturdays as we approach the anniversary of Our Lady's request for the consecration of Russia, connected to the 5 first Saturdays. So thank you, Chris. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, and God bless everyone.
You too. Until then.